tell us what you're up to now?
I'm just painting some pots, chooks and ducks, stuff that's in the garden right now, flowers, that sort of thing, reminding me what's happening at the moment.
And you have them for sale in number 47 Louee Street.
That's right, yep. We've got plates and bowls and cups and other people's ceramics and other work as well for sale here.
Well, they're lovely.
Yep. That's our chooks.
Now, I just filmed the land exhibition very briefly that's on the walls.
Yep.
Can you tell us about that?
The land show, it's an exhibition that we've had going now for a long time, since 1993, and it's about connection to land. A lot of the artists that are in the exhibition have been in it since the beginning, and they it's a conversation, an ongoing conversation about what's going on for them emotionally or physically or philosophically in terms of their connection to land. So some of the people live further out west and some people live in this area, so it's quite a different selection of work, and also it's very much connected with the inland.
Yes, because I drove up yesterday and it's just beautiful. The wattles are out and there's cherry blossoms and it's spring. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, we've had a little bit of rain, which is great, so things are looking a little bit better, but it's not the end of the drought yet. That's still a long way off, long way off. One of my current projects in Rylstone is a radial swan competition. We encourage people to bring tyre swans made from old tyres that are made without wire in them, and make the great Australian icon, the swan, and bring it for a competition.
Can I have a closer look?
Sure. It's a bit grubby though. This is a cygnet. It's made from a lawnmower, a ride-on lawnmower tyre. It's got a bit of wire in it just to give the neck a bit of a shape, otherwise it tends to fall forward a little bit, and it's wired in and then painted. And it's just all cut and then turned inside out.
Very elegant.
Another project we've got on in the next month actually is a poetry workshop, which we're doing up at the having a workshop in this space, and then we're having poetry in the pub in the Rylstone Hotel on the evening.
I see you as quite a mentor. Number 47 is kind of a little cultural hub, and you mentor a lot of creative people in this area.
Yeah, well, the space works very well for that because we're centrally in town, and we've got the works of a lot of different people here normally. I mean, just in terms of works for sale on commission separately to any exhibition we happen to be having at the time, people tend to pop in and tell us what they're doing, and also to find out about things. I get phoned up a lot by people needing a certain kind of work or wanting to contact someone about work or that sort of thing, and so I just try and pass on as much information as I can.
Ginny, you and Jeff have had rather a hard time. Can you tell us about the Stroking It Out exhibition that you both had last year?
Sure. Jeff had a stroke last October, and we had an exhibition booked for this space for February of this year, and we decided rather than cancel it, we would do an exhibition on his stroke and the process of the stroke. He was in rehab hospital in Sydney for 5 months, and he did a whole series of small watercolours of that, of the process. He did them in hospital, and we had an exhibition here in February, and then we took the whole exhibition down to Sydney to the rehab hospital in March, where we had a great response as well. I'm just looking for a print at the moment that, and I don't think I have it, of one of the works that I had in the exhibition, of red shoes, and the shoes belong to a lovely lady that I met up in the palliative care unit called Helen, and I kept seeing her walking around in these, I saw the wheelchair with other people pushing her around with these amazing red shoes, and they were beautiful shoes, and I thought, oh, how wonderful, because she couldn't walk in those shoes, but she wore them. And eventually I got up the courage to ask her whether she would be prepared for me to do a lino cut of her shoes as part of the exhibition, and she burst into tears. But she was thrilled at the prospect of it, so I did some drawings of her. And it was a funny situation with Helen's piece, because I'm just finding the other one that I've got here of her. I went up to meet her and to do some drawings for the piece, and I had every intention of doing Helen and her shoes, and every direction that I did the drawing from wasn't right. Her shoes are here, and in the end I said to her, look, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I think the wheelchair is going to take over. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up with an image of her wheelchair that really became her body. And she asked me to call the work Helen Becomes Her Wheelchair. And I subsequently did a small lino cut of just the shoes and printed it in red, which was lovely. And she was very pleased with both the images. But when I cut this lino, it was an extremely emotional experience for me. I cried buckets because it felt like I was cutting into her body. It felt like I was she actually was becoming this lino of the wheelchair. And this wheelchair, I mean, in behind here this is a chin button, so she could work the wheelchair with the chin. She didn't have use of any of her body by then, just her incredible spirit. She died in May. The first work that I did for this exhibition was japonica. This actually is hand coloured, and this is a print of it that I still need to hand colour, just the stem and the buds as they're coming. I started this lino cut before Jeff had his stroke, and I decided to include it in it because I was very pleased with it, and also because it was a sort of a starting point for the work that was before his stroke.
Ginny, can you read what you've written?
Yes.
Now, when you do the lino cuts, you write all this in reverse, don't you?
That's right. It's all written in reverse. This is actually a quote about japonica from Peter Valder's beautiful book on Chinese gardens. Japonica, Japanese flowering quince, symbolic of Chinese New Year. In China, grouped with crabapple and referred to as hai tang. Tang, an ancient name for a group of plants related to the pear. Hai meaning sea, or generally used for things imported from overseas. The second work that I did relating to Jeff's stroke was a bunch of drawings that I did when he was still in the stroke unit in St Vincent's Hospital. This one's called Two Beds, and this is Jeff in his bed at St Vincent's Hospital, with all the incredible machinery on his bed and on his pipes to his legs to expand that, and a drip that most of his drugs were in. It was very, very tough to get into him through all this equipment, and that is our bed at home. I'm in our bed and he's in his bed. The next work that I did is called Entarsis. Entarsis is a Greek word meaning it refers to the way the Greeks designed their columns so that they're actually fatter in the middle of the column and thinner at the top and the bottom, so that it appears to be a straight line. And what I'm referring to in this work is actually the potential. So at that point when I was working on this work, Jeff was in a situation where we didn't know what would happen, we didn't know whether he would live. And it was all about the total potential. I gave myself the challenge to do each of these lines in one cut, which I did. Then I did a couple of silly ones, I suppose. This was a sign in the hospital: no smoking at any time, no naked flame when oxygen is in use. It occurred to me that, as far as I'm aware, there is never a time when oxygen isn't in use, but and this is everywhere all over the hospital. Another one: the space is only the space when you are in it. I guess that sort of is about the kind of fracture in a certain way of our life, because there was my life here where I was running around looking after Josh and the shop and the gallery stuff and everything, and then I'd be spending half my week in Sydney running around there, and it was a very strange time. This is a lino cut of the place that I stayed in while I was in Sydney, an office. It's called Rylstone Street, and it was a very lovely place of a lot of refuge for me at the time. The next work I'll talk about is this one. It's called The Weight of This Event. This took me the longest of any of the works to cut, and it's about the stroke, and it's cut backwards, so you have to be very careful. I'll read it out just so it's a bit easier. The weight of this event is that of a planet. The weight of this love is that of a planet. The weight of this acknowledgement is that of a planet. The weight of this disintegration is that of a planet. The weight of this information is that of a planet. The weight of this compromise is that of a planet. The weight of this patience is that of a planet. The weight of this regaining is that of a planet. The weight of this fidelity is that of a planet. The weight of this obligation is that of a planet. The weight of this renegotiation is that of a planet. The weight of this. It was a very emotional piece for me to cut as well, and lots of people have cried looking at that, and I think it's actually acted against it being sold, unfortunately, or fortunately. I'm actually very comfortable about showing my true feelings about this process, because I think it's really important that people are honest about what happens in their lives, and we tend to shut down a lot of that information to make other people comfortable sometimes, or because it's too much for us to expose about ourselves. But in the process of doing this exhibition, which took the 4 months of the drawings and the cuttings and the printing of the work, I cried a lot, but I actually gained a lot of inner resources for it. The last work that I did, which I'll just show you now, because I was cutting this while we were printing, like literally cutting it while we were printing it so that I could do it. It's actually part of a prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. It's only part of it. It's a very long prayer, but I've just done this part. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console. Another thing that was very important about the exhibition was the importance of also witnessing some of the things that other people were dealing with. We met a lovely man in hospital with Jeff called Andrew Chu, who was amazingly supportive and strong to all the people that were in the little rehab hospital, Sacred Heart in Darlinghurst. This is Andrew's back brace. I've called it Andrew's back. Andrew was knocked over in a bus and broke part of his back, and he had a very incredibly painful and slow recovery, and he can manage without his brace some of the time, but not all of the time. This is the view from the back, and after I cut it, I was really struck about how much it's like a Viking or like a piece of armour or something like that, and it's a very strong work, and he really loved that as well. That's the back view of it, and this is the front view of it. It was amazing to be talking to people in the rehab hospital, all the people there, about their situations, and them watching me, because I was able to take the smaller linos with me and work there, and they were able to actually get some sense of recognition about the things that they were going through. This is in a way the last work that I did for the exhibition. It's our front veranda. In summer, I had a week or so where I didn't go down to Sydney, where I was working solidly on my work, on the linos, finishing them off to print. The tree was full of pears, which I bottled that week as well. This is just a gentle scene. My front veranda in summer, hydrangea flowers in a pot, the bath ready to leap into if I get too hot, and the dog in the sofa resting, as always. This is the actual lino block that I printed this work from. As you can see, this is this part and this is that part, and all the writing is backwards, although there's not a lot of writing in this one. But it's quite an interesting process to try and visualise what it will look like, because it is different. The balance is different in the cutting and in the printing.
Wonderful.
Up there. Okay.
So Ginny, you have did Jeffrey have a stroke, or was it an aneurysm?
He had actually had 2 strokes, but they were as a result of a very large aneurysm in his right carotid artery, which meant that it affected his left side. So he had a long period in rehab, getting him back to a certain level of coherence, I suppose, because I mean initially he didn't know where he was. He kept telling me that the hospital was up on our land and things like that. It was a very kind of complicated reordering of his mind in a way. And then at the stage where they felt comfortable about operating on the aneurysm, they did, and that was the end of February.
So it's been a really hard time. So it's now August 2006. So this all happened
10 months.
10 months.
10 months ago, yeah.
Okay.
So it's still an ongoing process, although he is a lot better. There are all kinds of things that you don't realise. Spending so long in hospital meant that when he came home from hospital, he was very institutionalised. He found it quite threatening, or not so much threatening, but very frightening to be in a situation where there weren't nurses around, even though he'd been dying to come home the whole time he was away. He found it incredibly challenging managing the most basic things. Even just making a sandwich for himself or anything like that was beyond him to start with.
Yeah, because a lot of people who've suffered a serious illness suffer post-traumatic shock. Like, it's not just your body, it's your spirit and it's your mind and it's your emotional body. It's all of you.
That's right.
Whereas the focus to me seems to be on the physical. Very much so.
I found that very difficult. One of the lino cuts, the weight of this is a little bit about that. And while he was in hospital, that I would be visiting all the time, and they would be doing all the exercise. They'd be telling me constantly all the things that I needed to be doing. But the focus was totally on the physical, and nobody considered how difficult it would be, for starters, for me to actually manage any of those things, but also how difficult it was to actually to understand that how different he would be as a person.
And see, the woman has to be so strong. You have to be strong for him. You've got a 6-year-old son, and you've got other children, and like, if you'd collapse, the whole thing, But you didn't?
Well, no, very close to it quite a few times. I guess it's just a matter of there's no other way to go. I mean, you can't... I seriously considered running away quite a few times, but Jeff has been working very hard, and we talked through all the stuff that came up. We have had lots of arguments, heaps of arguments. There's been a lot of... I've been quite cranky with the various bodies, like the brain injury units and things like that, about what they haven't told me. The difficulty of living with someone who suddenly seemingly is a lot older. So he forgets things. He forgets to put the lid on things. He forgets to shut doors. He'll remember the first part of a job sequence that might only have 2 or 3 sequences in it, 2 or 3 steps in it. He'll forget after the first one. But all those things have improved in that time. So the fact that you're seeing improvement, even though it's very slow, is very encouraging.
And the prognosis is very, very good, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, he's just been having acupuncture on his arm to get finger function back in his left arm, and he had very strong response to acupuncture to begin with, where he had just things like he lost his voice a little bit during the operating procedure, and his face was quite low on one side, dropped a little bit on the left, and that is normal now. And he was very depressed. I think that's part of the post-traumatic stress disorder, where you have something so shocking happening to your body, and every cell in your body is aware of the injury. And so he had to go through that whole stage of understanding that and dealing with the emotional impact of that.
So things could never ever be so hard ever again.
That's right. That's the plan. Another thing that happens with strokes is that because you're affected physically on one side, Jeff he was told by the doctors that he would have quite a monotone voice after the stroke, and that his face would be quite non-expressive. And we just thought that was a physical thing, but actually it's not a physical thing. It's frontal lobe damage, which is what he has. One of the effects of frontal lobe damage is that you lose the ability to hear the tone in other people's information. So he would respond inappropriately to things. Like, for example, Josh was being difficult to come into the car, our little boy, when I needed to go somewhere quickly, and I was irritated but not angry, and he couldn't hear the difference between that. So in trying to support me, it was totally over the top in his response to Josh, and I was quite shocked. And I said to him afterwards, I was just irritated, I wasn't angry, and he didn't understand that. He couldn't hear that in my voice. Anyway, I then rang the brain injury unit in Bathurst and said, look, is this the case? Is it a situation where, because his voice is monotone and his facial expression is monotone, that in effect that also means that he can't see the difference in someone's facial expression or intonation in another person? And they said yes. And I shouted and cried. Why didn't they tell me that? It would have made a lot of things more understandable to start with, but it also meant that I might have been a bit more understanding or a bit more careful in terms of my explaining to Jeff where I was at or where other people were at. It put a lot of strain on us for a few months because I didn't understand that. Those things have improved anyway, but it just all those kind of little things that they don't tell you, that they'll tell you the physical look of something, but they won't tell you what's actually also part of it, the emotional part of it, the whole body response to something like a stroke.
Okay. Ginny, can I just say one thing? I'm a member of your fan club. And keep on doing all the good stuff that you do.
Thanks, Jan.